Have you ever thought that a strike, yes, just one strike, could bring an entire country to its knees? Imagine America in 1894, a country resounding with the roar of the railroads suddenly falling silent. Trains stopped, factories closed, and thousands of workers chanted the same slogan, justice. This was no ordinary protest, but the moment when the foundations of America were shaken. The Pullman Strike, a story in which power, politics, cruelty, and the spirit of humanity collided. Today we will delve into the depths of this uprising, learning how a small-town protest became a national story. And yes, this was the moment that gave birth to Labor Day. The year is 1894. America was at the height of industrial growth. Steel giants, oil tycoons, and railroad magnates were all making money. But beneath this progress, the sweaty workers had forgotten what happiness felt like. Their lives were like engines running on tracks, never stopping. Just keep going, keep burning. There was a small town south of Chicago, Pullman Town, a dream town on the surface, but a cage on the inside. The company built the city, gave them houses, but at the same time took away their freedom. The same company that paid the salary also took the rent. Whatever came to the worker went back to the company's coffers, and behind it all was a man, George Pullman, the inventor of luxury railway cars, wealthy, self-confident, and perhaps overly egotistical. He thought that if an ideal city could be built where everyone lived by his principles, there would be peace in the world. But his ideal dream turned into a nightmare for the workers. When the financial crisis of 1893 hit, Pullman cut wages but not rent. The workers were starving, and he said, "This is business, not sentiment." That sentence became a fire. Think of a worker who builds railroad cars from morning to night, finally reassuring his wife that things might be better next week. But each week was worse than the last. Wages were low, food was expensive, and hope, a rare commodity. Children went to bed hungry, women were in debt. No newspaper in the company town dared to print against Pullman. It was a system where every breath was taken at the behest of the company. And then, one day, the moment came when patience ran out. On May 11th, 1894, the workers stopped work. First there was a small group, then hundreds, then thousands. Someone shouted, "Enough is enough!" And that was it. That slogan became history. The Pullman Company factories closed. The workers took to the streets. George Pullman said, "This is a rebellion." But for the workers, it was a fight for survival. It was then that another name came onto the scene. Eugene V. Debs, a charismatic leader, the president of the American Railway Union, ARU. Debs felt the pain of the workers and decided he would stand with them. The ARU declared that if the Pullman workers were not treated fairly, railroad workers across the country would stop working. And then with just one order, the heart of America, its railroad system, stopped. Within a few days, the strike had swept the entire country. From Chicago to New York, from St. Louis to Los Angeles, trains were stopped. Mail was closed, trade was halted, the food system was disrupted. The common people were amazed at how it had all started in one city and paralyzed the country. The government was worried, the businessmen were sweating, and the workers were determined. This was not just a fight for jobs, it was a fight for honor. The pressure began to build. The business class shouted, "Save the country!" President Grover Cleveland had to intervene, but instead of listening to the workers, the government sided with the railroad companies. Federal troops were sent in to get the trains running again. And that was it. The moment when the protest turned bloody. The military and the workers came face to face on the streets of Chicago. Tear gas, bullets, fire, everything. Dozens were killed, hundreds were injured. The workers were shouting, "We are not the enemy, we are citizens!" But the guns did not understand this. Debs was arrested, and the government declared the strike illegal. But to be honest, the only thing that is illegal is that which threatens the powerful. The newspapers were in an uproar. Some called the workers rebels, others heroes. Pullman portrayed himself as the victim, a businessman who was being wronged. But on the ground, the bodies of the workers lay. The public was divided. Some said, "These are crooks." Some said, "These are true Americans." The media fanned the flames, and reality was lost in the fog. Eugene Debs was brought to trial. The charge, disobeying government orders. But the speech Debs gave went down in history. He said, "I am not against any law, but against injustice." He went to jail, but his ideology set him free. Later, that ideology became the basis of the socialist movement. Although the strike was defeated, a fire burned in the hearts of the workers. They saw how the system of power worked and how it united against them, but they were not afraid. This was the moment when American workers recognized that if they united, they could shake the system. The government realized that it had lost public sympathy. President Cleveland took a step to ease public anger. Labor Day was declared a national holiday, ostensibly in honor of workers, but in reality it was a political ploy to cool the flames of anger. Ironic, isn't it? The government that had been sending in troops yesterday was talking about celebrating today. Pullman himself was crushed by his own success. His company became infamous, and he became the target of social criticism. Once called an industrial visionary, he was now called an industrial tyrant. When he died in 1897, it is said that his coffin was locked in an iron box so that no one would dig his grave in anger. Yes, that was how hateful the man had become. The common people could not forget this incident. This was not just a story about workers, but a story about the awakening of the public. In homes, in factories, in schools, people talked about it. Some said, "This is the beginning." Some said, "This This is the seat of revenge, and indeed, labor organizations grew stronger in the decades that followed. Historian David Ray Papke says, "The Pullman Strike was not just a workers' revolt, but a test of American democracy." While Stanley Buderle writes, "It was the moment when the government decided that it was necessary to protect the capitalist, not the people." Both seem true, because the Pullman Strike exposed the shiny face of capitalism. The strike changed the thinking of American society. Now people were not just demanding jobs, but justice. Women, children, workers, all began to speak the same language. That language was equality. And from here were born the movements that went on to change the face of America. If you think the Pullman Strike ended there, don't. Its effects were felt for decades. Railroad unions were strengthened, workers' rights laws were passed, and leaders like Debs became role models for future generations. This event was not just a page, but the beginning of an era. Think about the workers who only asked for justice. Their children starved to death, their cities burned, but their sacrifice gave the entire nation a day, Labor Day. What a strange paradox that a day of joy was born from a story of sorrow. Every year when you rest, remember that rest came from someone's sacrifice. The Pullman Strike is not just history, it is a mirror. The struggle between power, politics, and the people continues today. The characters have changed, but the story is the same. In the next part, we'll see how this strike changed American law, the media, and public consciousness forever. So stay tuned, because the real story is yet to come. After the Pullman Strike, the American government looked at itself in the mirror, and it didn't like the picture. As public pressure mounted, politicians realized that ignoring workers was now a dangerous game. Some states immediately began to consider labor laws. The debate was whether the government was the servant of the capitalist or the protector of the people. That was the question on every newspaper, every forum. Workers saw their power for the first time. By becoming one voice, they could change the law. The government gave the slogan of industrial peace, but everyone knew that this was not peace, but a temporary silence. The Pullman Strike gave birth to a new relationship between the state and the people, one of distrust, and that feeling did not disappear for centuries to come. When Eugene V. Debs left prison, he was not the same man. He had become an ideological revolutionary from a labor leader. In prison, he read Karl Marx and said, "Now I understand how the system works." When he came out, he spoke of socialism, of equality, justice, and popular sovereignty. The government called him a danger, but the younger generation saw him as a hero. Debs was now a symbol that truth cannot be imprisoned. The Pullman Strike ignited within him the spark that would later become a symbol of rebellion in American politics. He ran for president 5 times. He never won, but his ideas live on in labor movements today. Interestingly, for decades, the Pullman Strike was called a riot in history books, not a movement. The powerful are always the ones writing the story, and they portrayed the workers as the culprits. But over time, historians have changed the story. Today, schools teach that the Pullman Strike changed American society. The role of the media is still questionable. It spoke the language of the powerful, not the weak. This incident reminds us that who speaks is always more important than what is true. The truth of history always changes with the voice, and the Pullman Strike is a prime example of this. Labor organizations found new life after the Pullman Strike. The American Federation of Labor, AFL, and other unions changed their tactics. They now knew that power was not just in weapons, but in unity. They entered politics, became involved in legislation, and asserted their position. By the turn of the 20th century, unions had begun to influence wages, hours, and working conditions. The Pullman Strike became a symbol that even defeat can be the beginning of victory. Even if we lose, we will still win in history, the workers said. The Pullman town that started it all slowly lost its luster. The company abandoned it, and the town became a ghost town. Those beautiful buildings, once considered symbols of progress, are now silent ruins. People used to say that at night the voices of workers still echo in these empty streets. In the mid-20th century, it was taken over by the city of Chicago, and later declared a historic district. The strange thing is that the place where the system of slavery was hidden is now considered a monument to freedom. Man also plays strange games with history. Whenever Labor Day comes in America, people have barbecues, go on shopping sales, and celebrate the holiday. But very few people remember whose blood made this day. The workers who lost their lives in the Pullman Strike may be forgotten today. But every year, the first Monday in September comes as a silent echo of their sacrifice. Some say Labor Day is in honor of the workers, others say atonement for the government's crimes. Both are correct, for it is a day of celebration and mourning at the same time. The Pullman Strike not only changed its time, but also showed the way for generations to come. When the Great Depression hit in the 1930s, labor unions showed the same spirit again. Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal policies included labor rights, and all of this was possible because a few people dared to stand up in 1894. Even today, when workers at Amazon, Starbucks, and Tesla talk about forming unions, they are actually carrying on the legacy of the Pullman Strike. History repeats itself, only the costumes change. If Pullman were alive today, he might say, "I was just doing business." But that's the problem. When business becomes bigger than humanity, disaster is certain. The Pullman Strike is a reminder that when the balance of wealth is upset, justice falls to the ground. The capitalists build their buildings high, but the workers are buried in their foundations. And then one day today, that foundation screams. That scream was the Pullman Strike. It was a protest against a system that treated man as a machine. Many schools now teach the Pullman Strike as a case study. Teachers ask children, did the government do the right thing? And the room falls silent because the answer is not easy. Some say the rule of law was necessary. Others say humanity is greater than the law. That is the beauty of the Pullman Strike. It makes us think about who sets the standard of justice, he who has power or he who stands for the truth. The same question is as relevant today as it was in 1894. The Pullman Strike also affected workers in other countries. Industrial unions in Europe learned from the incident. Labor movements in Britain, Germany, and even India said, look, even a country like America has not stopped oppressing workers. This was the beginning of global labor solidarity. Although it was an era of slow letters and newspapers, the echo of the Pullman Strike crossed borders. It was the first global news that united the working class. The language of humanity is always the same: justice. The event also influenced poets, painters, and writers. The stories feature the characters of the Pullman, workers, ordinary people who clashed with the system. Several novels and plays were based on the event. It became not just history, but a chapter of emotions. For the first time, American literature made the ordinary worker the central character. This was the moment when the hero became the one who held the hammer, not the one who held the sword. This was a cultural revolution. Silent but profound economists say that the Pullman Strike taught the lesson that the market is not just made up of numbers, but of people. If the workers are not happy, the economy is also sick. Before increasing production, it is necessary to increase human dignity. This philosophy later became the basis of human resource management. An irony is that today the same companies that used to oppress workers now create employee happiness index. Time has changed the words, but the question is still the same. Where is the justice? If an incident like the Pullman Strike had happened today, perhaps the entire Twitter would have exploded. Justice for workers would have trended. Viral videos would have come out, and the government would have had to respond immediately. But at that time, the voice was only in the newspapers, which were in the hands of the powerful. The only difference is, today it is difficult to suppress voices, but oppression is still alive. The Pullman Strike teaches us that standing up against power never gets old. Only the method changes. Technology has changed, but conscience? Maybe not. When you see a worker working overtime today, a driver working without sleep, remember, the Pullman Strike was fought for them. Labor Day is not an ordinary holiday, it is a promise that we will not forget that labor is never cheap. The world has progressed, but justice still demands struggle. The lesson of the Pullman Strike is this: the strong do not always win. When the people are united, history is theirs. So now I ask you, did we learn anything from the Pullman Strike? Aren't workers facing the same problems today? Do we really celebrate Labor Day with meaning, or do we just treat it as a holiday? Perhaps it is time to look around us, to salute the hands that run the world. The Pullman Strike is over, but its spirit lives on, in the sweat of every worker, in the cry of every justice. If you truly feel this story, write in the comments, respect for labor, because remember, history never sleeps and it only watches who is awake. This was the Pullman Strike, a story that shook America and reminded us that humanity is founded on justice, not profit.